As you know, we try to categorize new features and techniques and so on into several pillars, which bring value to our customers and, of course, to you, our partners. Starting from the left, so usability and scale, right? And you could even say enterprise readiness, the heart of Pentera, the attack and exploits, and the advancements, and improvements that we keep on adding. Prioritization and remediation, which that's what we need in order to fix the issues or our customers need, and complete attack surface coverage. Now remember that, because we're going to talk more about that towards the end of this webinar. So what are we going to talk about? New features, two-factor authentication, and enhancements regarding the user experience, making it ease of use to be better, reporting enhancements, and the new attacks and exploits. A lot of new, this version is really filled with all these new features and capabilities, and one by one we'll go over. So let's start with the new features. I expect that everyone here on the webinar understands the importance of two-factor authentication. This allows another level of authentication, right? It's not just username, password, but additional capability using almost any type of authenticator app out there, Duo, Authy, Google Authenticator, and more. And it adds this ability to protect Pentera, right, and keep it safe, including from users who might accidentally expose it. Why is it important, right? This is something that we always need to think about when looking at new features and capabilities that Pentera has. We always try to add, or always add actually, features that we understand from you, our partners, from our customers, and internally, that these are important. Since we've been getting this ask for quite a while now for adding two-factor authentication, we've done it, right? We listen to our ecosystem, let's say. So now there's additional layer of security, but I think that even more importantly, this maybe the same level of importance, it provides the ability to meet compliance. Many requirements, regulations, and so on demand that two-factor authentication be implemented in platforms, especially security platforms. So now we have it, and just as an example, there was the attack on Colonial Pipeline. 1Password, that's all that was needed. Two-factor authentication, it's much harder to perform an attack that utilizes 1Password. This is how it looks like in the Pentera interface. We create it from user management, and you can see that you can require or not, right, depending on the organization and what you are trying to accomplish. So you can require or not two-factor authentication, which then, of course, leads toward the logon where you would implement or use it. Reporting is one of the most important topics in security, right? In cybersecurity, especially. And I would even focus that on penetration testing, red teaming, validation. You need the reports, you need them to be efficient and to the point in order to be able to afterwards pay this forward or forward this to the people that will be performing remediation, to the people who perform the risk assessments, the CISO, and so on. So we've improved reporting in several ways. Let's dive into this. And by looking at these screenshots here, I'm guessing that you can already guess where we went. So first of all, you can now add remediation wiki articles to the detailed reports, right? Similar in a manner that's similar to adding the attack vectors to the report, you can choose which attack vectors you want to add. Sorry, which wiki articles you want to add, and you can add all of them. The detailed report is much more comprehensive now, and every vulnerability and achievement is included. The top 50 hosts, naturally, with the those that were taken over included, compromised accounts, the passwords from Active Directory, everything is in the report now, which gives the remediation teams, CISO, whoever needs to review the reports, it negates the need to go to the Pentera UI if they don't want to. So again, this was a request from you, our partners, but also from customers, and we added it, which gives it one report with all the context. You have what Pentera achieved, you have the vulnerabilities, and now you have the full-blown remediation wiki articles in the same report. No need to use different interfaces, go to Pentera UI and stuff like that. One of the main values that we personally believe that we're giving here is showing how the reports are evolving based on what's needed on the field. Some of you I've already discussed personally with some of you this feature request, a possibility to upload a file mid-test, mid-scenario with a list of IPs. No more inputting manually. You can have the files prepared beforehand on the side, ready to be used. You do not need to stop and restart a scenario after adding additional IPs. Makes it much easier and quicker, right? You get this flexibility, which also helps you guide the scenario in the direction you want. Let's say you cover one subnet with Pentera, and then you want to add another, but you don't want to add the entire subnet. You don't want to go, /24 or something. You might say, I want to pick and choose. So if you have a list ready, just upload it. Save the manual labor, let's say. Residue cleanup has been one of our focuses since we launched Pentera, since we started selling, basically. And as most of you, if not all of you know, Pentera performs cleanup as the final phase of a testing scenario. Up till now, we've had the capability to either add credentials, which would allow Pentera to perform an in-depth cleanup, right, using privileged accounts to do so, like domain admin. But this always happened at the last stage of the testing scenario. Now we separated them. Pentera will continue with the automatic cleanup. That's something that's never going to change because it needs to clean up the residue. Never say never. But now you can perform residue cleanup at the click of a button, right, without having to run the scenario again. It's separated from the scenario, and under the environment configuration, now you have the ability to add privileged users for post-testing, right? After the test, some of you may have encountered, let's say, objections from prospects when they say, hey, but you're adding a domain admin account to the system. How do I know that you're not really using it for the scenario itself and perform a gray or white box testing scenario? You always have the skeptics there. So now, separated. Now, we're going to clean up after the test is over, and this won't happen. This objection will be answered, actually. So I don't know how many of you have used what we call the DAN, the Dynamic Attack Node, which is an extension of Pentera, right? You can deploy a Dynamic Attack Node, which is a non-persistent node that only exists for the duration of the testing scenario. Up till now, we needed to install a Dynamic Attack Node or deploy it from the main node, and there were issues sometimes when the ports weren't open, or the prospect or the customer didn't allow the usage of the dynamic attack node in its previous methodology. So what we did is now Pentera can create an executable which can be deployed on a specific machine, right, that you decide, and you overcome all the issues that we've had in the past with regards to the dynamic attack node. And as you can see here in the screenshot, so you would provide host details. That's literally just the IP, right, of the host where you want to deploy this attack node. This is in line with the safety of Pentera, right? This means that the DAN won't be able to be installed on any other machine. It's dedicated to one. You could say that it would get a DHCP or a static IP address, and then you would see that it gets the IP or the ranges, right? You could also say this can work in a specific range like previously. Download it on the host and run it. Notice that again on the safety side, or security even, if you close this window during configuration, that specific dynamic attack node will be deleted, will be non-usable anymore. So we keep this very compartmentalized in order to ensure that this is used in the proper manner and doesn't cause any issues. Now, why is this important? Again, we provided what we've been asked for. This streamlines the usability, the user experience of a dynamic attack node, means that there's no need to open or change it or anything like that. All the deployment of the dynamic attack node is done locally on that machine. And what it does, if you think about it, you now have a much larger scope, or the possibility to have a much larger scope, to have DANs in various locations on the network for the duration of the testing scenario, deleted and removed automatically at the end. You can perform various scenarios in remote networks with this DAN executable. Here's the first form in the wizard, or pane in the wizard, where you can see that you provide the host IP, like I said earlier, and you bind it to that machine, meaning that's where it's going to run. Then, of course, the choices that I said, including download it now or forever hold your peace. Questions before we dive into the attacks and exploits? Looking at the chat and the Q&A, and I don't see anything. Okay, we'll have more time afterwards, and I'll continue. Pentera has the capability to perform living off the land attacks. Living off the land means using or utilizing standard approved tools, capabilities, and so on in order to exploit in the network. For example, FTP. FTP is something that is so commonly used in organizations, and Pentera can, let's say, piggyback on FTP and download payloads to hosts using that. But there are others, of course, right? We have BitsAdmin and CertUtil and others, but now in this version, we've added multiple more. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Linux, curl, right? It's something that's it's a command that can be used, or a tool that can be used, and is commonly used. Pentera can exploit that. This gives Pentera many more capabilities, many more ways to perform living off the land techniques and deploy payloads, which is something that personally I've been waiting for, because it's really good to see. And joking aside, really gives good validation. organizations focus on the usual suspects, the known vulnerabilities. Here, it's performing with using downloaders. It's pretty hard to catch an attack because, like I said, these tools are in use by admins and developers and so on. Browsers, some people say that they're becoming the operating system of the future, because almost everything is done through there. So many systems are accessed by the browser. And what we've added is a technique that can perform browser hijacking, where what Pentera does, it tries to send commands to Chrome via command line. It's called Chrome headless mode. I'm not going to go into the specific details, but it allows a user or someone, an attacker, to interact with the browser via command. Add to that token impersonation capabilities, and this allows Pentera to extract screenshots from critical web applications on victim hosts. And this is done credential-lessly. Not sure if that's a word, but meaning that Pentera does not need to have the victim's credentials unauthenticated. This allows, using Pentera to continuously and automatically test these web apps. It's important to note that as opposed to attacks that we have added in the past, Pentera is not going to try to steal credentials in this type of attack. It's actually going to do a POC, a proof of concept, by screenshotting the web application, which, if you can screenshot the web application, an attacker or Pentera naturally can do more. And you don't always need to do more in order to show that something's vulnerable. So that's what is happening here in the browser hijacking, where this is the attack vector, or I should say an example of attack vector. We can shift a bit. In this one, we provided a user to Pentera. Afterwards, Pentera opened a remote control channel. This is standard stuff so far. Pentera executed code remotely on that host. Payload established connection, and then Pentera impersonated user security, extracted the screenshot, actually twice from 2 different applications, and told us that it got critical application access and also what the app was. Gives a lot of value to the validation of what's going on inside organizations regarding browsers. Many organizations have policies that are supposed to protect the browser. Here, now they can validate. Okay, so DNS bending is basically the act of convincing, a target to talk to me, the attacker, and I can basically perform man-in-the-middle, sorry, not me, Pentera, will perform man-in-the-middle attacks by manipulating these services. Now, without diving into the technical bits and bytes, what this does is it allows Pentera to cause hosts on the network to talk to it, think that Pentera is a valid or legit DNS server, which of course would allow Pentera to progress in exploiting the attack. Progressing the attack and exploit the host. Another example of the improvements that we keep on trying to add to the poisoning frameworks. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that one of the things that makes Pentera so efficient, so effective, so valuable is the fact that our R&D department built in frameworks. We have the RC, Remote Code Execution Framework. We have the poisoning framework and the cracking framework and so on, which, as you probably can see and understand by sheer number of the techniques that we've added, it's much easier do so, because the framework is very modular and allows hacking. This is the vector of that specific DNS bending where Pentera found the vulnerability that ARP poisoning is possible. That's a vulnerability. Pentera was able to gain an achievement and poison the ARP cache on the host, and ultimately return the forged DNS records. Now that means that the DNS records on that machine are not legit. Right? Ask anyone in IT, cybersecurity, whatever, these fields, what are the top 3 risks or security topics that worry them? Ransomware will always be somewhere in the top 3, especially in the past 2 years. As you know, hopefully know, we've added support for Maze and Revel, where Pentera performs the attacks as exactly like they're performed in the wild, using the same encryption algorithm and the same TTPs. Now we've added Conti, another family, another ransomware group, where, as you can see here in this screenshot of a post, that they're arguably one of the most sophisticated and infamous Russian-based ransomware groups, and they have also begun utilizing Log4j exploits. So there's a combination of 2 kind of very worrisome topics here. FBI also think that Conti is very, very dangerous, and we all know this, right? That's simply one of the ransomware categories or families that's being used in the wild nowadays. I took these screenshots not necessarily to go over the entire attack vector, right? That's something I don't want to go over every single one. That's not the point of this webinar. Let's talk about what's new. Having talked about what's new, notice that here, this 1.0, this generated encryption key, right? Ransomware is going, what ransomware does, it encrypts files. Naturally, Pentera does the same. So after generating the encryption key in preparation to encrypt files, this is the rest of the vector. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have seen Pentera in action and so on. I see some new names here, or at least new for me. But notice what happens here. After generating the encryption key, enumerating files, right, understanding which files are on the host, encrypting them, and so on, like you can see Pentera created a mutex object, and there was establishment of connection, exfiltration of data, right? Everything that happens is in line with the Conti ransomware techniques. Stopping backup services, emulating shadow copies deletion, all of these are indicators of compromise that can be measured and remediated. You can see there are vulnerabilities here, which naturally are remediated. ZeroLog, I personally have an affection to it. Not because of the vulnerability itself, but because of the second big bullet. 3 days, more or less, after ZeroLog was published, our R&D team jumped on it and prepared a scanner, right? And that immediately added the value where users of Pentera could find, are they vulnerable to ZeroLog? Now, what ZeroLog in the basis sense allows is an unauthenticated attacker, no credentials, right? No username, password, and so on. If he or she has network access to a specific network, they can and specifically to a domain controller, they can impersonate any computer that's part of the domain, including a domain controller. This means that they can impersonate, right, make believe that they are a domain controller, and devices on the network will try to authenticate and utilize services usually provided by domain controller. This means that Pentera will be able to exploit and attack and take over those users in the network, computers, anything that it wants, because the domain controller is king of the north, if you will, lord of the domain. What's the value here, the importance here? Yes, we move very fast on the detection side, but remember that publicly available exploits, those POCs that you might find on GitHub or other locations, they're usually, I'll even emphasize, usually not safe, because the goal of the developer or cyber researcher or pen tester is to exploit. And they don't always consider the safety of or the results. Now we're talking about ZeroLog. Remember, we said that this vulnerability can impact the domain controller. That can have dire consequences. That can disrupt services that are running, can prevent authentication, all kinds of bad things. So it's extremely important to be safe when dealing with domain controllers. And as always, and this wasn't special because this is what we always do, we implemented the exploit with safety in mind. No downtime, no blue screens of death, and so on. And remember that this is one of the pillars of our platform. This is a short vector example, right? That's why I specifically said example here. You can see that Pentera found a host that was vulnerable to ZeroLog. Great. But what happened here is that the result was that Pentera was able to collect domain admin NTLM hash. That is a very high achievement. And ultimately, if Pentera either cracks the hash or relays it, the sky's the limit with what it can do in the network. PetitPotam. Personally, I love the name. It rolls on the tongue. This was published or disclosed, this vulnerability, in August 2021. What it does, it allows, again, an attacker external, remotely from the network, unauthenticated, no credentials, to take over the domain. There's the method here is actually exploiting Active Directory certificate services. So quickly, just for those of you who do not know what that means, ADCS or Active Directory certificate services, it's a service in the network that will that manages the certificates, the security certificates. So exploiting that, boom, full access. Now, the way that it's done is by performing relay techniques, right? With credentials relaying to other hosts, grabbing the domain admin's NTLM hash, and then, which of course, like I said earlier, allows an organization, the attacker to take over the domain. The focus here is understanding that this is an advanced attack. This is not, a script KDD attack. This is something that is being used in the wild and can help our customers validate. Now, with all of these, attack techniques, these vectors, and so on, customers can validate their Active Directory. Can it be taken over? In these techniques and methods, of course, because who knows what tomorrow will bring, and an attacker will develop something that doesn't exist nowadays. But we are on it. We keep on implementing attacks which hopefully, I'm kidding, validate multiple use cases or multiple tools or multiple risks that organizations view. So this attack vector starts with the PetitPotam vulnerability, with a relay of an authentication request, getting the domain controller account certificate. Again, not going to dive into the bits and bytes here, but high level. Gets a ticket granting ticket, which is very important to be able to access domain admin NTLM hashes, which it got there, and Pentera ultimately found that the user is indeed domain admin, right? It validated this, and that it has access to other hosts. Because why stop at one host? Pentera will always spread out, try to propagate the attack. You know the drill. Proxy logon. Logon is kind of a well-liked term in vulnerability slang names, right? The full name or the true name is CV and so on. Proxy logon is the shorter version, I would say. So this is actually an older vulnerability from late 2020. Again, an unauthenticated remote attacker can exploit this by sending a specific manipulated request to an Exchange server that's vulnerable to this. For those of you who do not know, Exchange servers are the email servers, usually in Windows domains, Windows environments, and not only. They're a Microsoft email server. Pentera can now detect this vulnerability, okay, on Microsoft servers, Exchange servers. So first of all, let's understand what our attack surface is, right? Let's understand if we have those vulnerabilities that put us at risk. As with all the previous ones that we've talked about here, this vulnerability is also being exploited in the wild. Since this is a scanner, a vulnerability scanner, or this feature scans for the vulnerability, this is what we will see: the vulnerability itself, the insight, like what the risk is, remediation recommendations, with, of course, additional information in the wiki and so on. And I see a question or something by Shamiel. So I'm going to read this for everyone. You can't protect what you don't know about. In order to protect your entire attack surface, you must first know what your attack surface is. 2 thumbs up on that. You're so correct. For large enterprises, this can easily be hundreds of thousands of exposed assets, including systems, applications, domains, and certificates, all connected to the internet and your organization's internal network. So, yeah. So is that a question or a statement? Because I agree with the statement. That's the goal of Pentera, right? Now you added that. Internally, that's what Pentera does, right? Tries to map out all the assets that are live and continuously, until duration expires or you manually stop it, continue propagating the attacks and mapping out what's or validating the network. Regarding external assets, I'm gonna plead the fifth for now. I'm gonna, but I promise at the end of the webinar, I will talk about this again, okay? Shamiel, okay, I will get back to this. I just want to make sure that it has a separate place. Let's see if there's anyone. Luzano, I see you wanted to ask a question or lifted your hand. My pleasure, Shamiel. Ah, okay. If anyone else wants to, naturally, feel free to ask. Actually took the opportunity to stop and look at the question here because I wanted some of you to look at what you see on the screen. If I ran a poll right now and asked how many people implemented LAPs or have customers who have LAPs implemented, I expect that there will be more than 50%, being conservative here, maybe more. LAPs is the Microsoft solution for managing the local admin passwords, right? What happens, still happens sadly, but happened a lot in the past, is that organizations would create a golden image, right? An installation of a machine, everything configured, and then they simply duplicated it. The problem was that the credentials of the accounts that were there were also transferred. So if someone gave the local admin account a password of password, and then duplicated that golden image and installed multiple machines of that type, all of those would have a local admin password of password. Bad, right? This means that, and Pentera does this beautifully, grabs or succeeds in either relaying or cracking the hash and obtaining the password. Boom, all machines that use the same password are basically pawned or be owned by Pentera. So lapse is intended to mitigate that. Every password would be generated differently. Pentera can now attack the solution, right, which allows it to obtain the local admin passwords. The value here is that, and I've heard this myself from so many companies, many organizations think that lapse is, that's the solution to everything, exaggerating a bit, of course, and don't consider that it can be attacked as well. Additionally, it's free. Who doesn't love a free meal? So they also use this. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying anything bad about lapse. The thing is that it's considered to be comparatively safe. So organizations can now validate, is our lapse configuration secure? Can an attacker get to those passwords or get to the lapse admin password or not? Right? Let's make sure that the tools that we as a customer, right, have in place are really protecting us. And that's the goal of the lapse attack. Privilege escalation is one of the most common techniques that attackers try to perform. Who doesn't want to reach admin level credentials or privileges? Who doesn't want to be able to rule the network in order to perform the nefarious activity that the attacker wants to do? So what we've done is we've added local privilege escalation for Windows currently. And what this does is creates an admin account on a Windows host or Windows machine by exploiting the CVE 2021-1732 vulnerability. This does not only validate the possibility of privilege escalation, which naturally is one of the main things, but it will validate EDRs, next-gen antiviruses, any EPP or endpoint protection tool that is supposed to prevent or at least detect privilege escalation. It additionally also validates privileged account management platforms or tools, right? Solutions like CyberArk and Psychotic. Again, validation of what we have. Many organizations pour so much money into their security stack and simply do not know if they're safe enough. Here's the attack vector for this attack, where it ultimately ends with escalated privileges. We know for a fact that Pentera was able to escalate the privileges, and you can see that the vulnerabilities here that antivirus did not block, so that's the validation there. And we have, of course, the indication that this host is vulnerable to that specific vulnerability. So you can always know, and by the way, same IP here, so both vulnerabilities on the same machine. Is this, preventable? Probably. Okay, now notice what happened here. This is not the end of the attack vector, right? It continues, here's the escalated privileges, to the creation of the account, validating the local credentials, and you can see the user here has Pentera in its name, so you can always, or the customer can always recognize this as a Pentera account, and validating that this account has privileges on wherever it is, if it's a specific machine or multiple machines. By the way, think about combinations of vectors here. This one is about the local privilege escalation. But what happens if Pentera finds that this account that it created has privileges here, and it can harvest credentials or information in order to continue to any of these attacks, lapse or any other of the techniques that we've seen here. That's one of the beautiful things about Pentera. So last for today, but definitely not least, Log4j. So not even a month, right? Since it was disclosed, since the world heard about Log4j, the vulnerability Log4Shell basically impacts almost everything that uses Java, right? Specifically, you could say that yes, Apache, but any application that uses Java can be vulnerable, because Log4j is a library that's in use in so many applications that it just, it's ridiculous. It's critical, right? CVSS score of 10. So we're talking about something that usually needs to be addressed immediately based on CVSS scoring. But the fact that it's so spread out, so common, and so exploitable, that is why we need to pay attention. Now, what's important here? The day that it was disclosed, Pentera Labs, our research department, jumped onto it. And as always, started developing two things, a dedicated scanner or scanning capability, but also an exploit. Now, currently, the proprietary scanner is in Pentera, and the thing here that it's not just looking at a GIND string, it's not just the POCs that I've seen, for example, in GitHub and so on, where there's one method. Maybe it's implemented a little differently, but there's one method that's usually used. What we did is developed a holistic fuzzing capability, which uses multiple techniques in order to validate that the vulnerability is indeed there. Here you can see that Pentera detected the vulnerability after enumerating web services on that host, and well, this is not, let's say, full exploitation. This is exploitation to validate the existence of Log4Shell at this time. Why? You all know this. We are not going to add an exploit until it's 100% safe. So it's going to get there. Questions about features, about techniques, attacks, anything that we've discussed today before I talk about the external question that was asked here. Some of you may know that we've been working on another solution, an additional solution to complement what Pentera does today. The goal is to release this in early Q1 this year, and then we will be able to discover, enumerate, and ultimately, naturally, validate the entire attack surface of an organization end to end, outside in, inside out, and this will make Pentera the de facto validation platform. It's doing that, finding, let's say, leak credentials outside, trying to use them inside, getting in, and so on. All kinds of techniques and vectors like these will be in the platform. But the short answer is yes, we will also support the external attack surface. Thank you very much for joining. Let's make 2022 an amazing year for all of us. I hope that with Pentera you'll be able to do so.